Welcome, everyone, to the Zorich Podcast. I am Chris Zorich, excuse me. And on today's show, we have a former Notre Dame team member, Notre Dame alum, and winner of a 2014 World Series of Poker bracelet, Sam Jaddi. Folks, this is going to be an amazing, amazing interview. Sam, what's up, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Chris. I'm doing great. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story and get to know you a little bit better.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, first of all, folks who might not know what the World Series of Poker is, and we will have a chance to kind of get into that later, but more importantly, I mentioned that he was a team member. He actually walked on in 95, right?
Yep, 95.
That's awesome. But we're actually going to get to that a little bit later because kind of first I want to know a little bit about you. Kind of tell me about your childhood growing up in Seattle.
Yeah, so I grew up on Mercer Island, Washington. I was a soccer player, baseball player, football player, only a football player in high school, though, in my senior years. We'll get into a little bit of that. But I always had a huge passion for football, probably still my number one sport that I enjoy watching, even going out there and playing a little bit of flag football. Was very talented from a baseball and soccer perspective. My parents, first generation Americans, so my parents migrated from India in the late 50s, early 60s. And, football wasn't something that obviously they had any understanding of around that. It was cricket and soccer, right? Around that. So for me, I never really got pushed into football. My mom, she thought the game was too violent, so wouldn't let me play. Of course. Around that. But I love the game. I mean, Steve Largent, growing up in Seattle, Steve Largent, still my all-time favorite, NFL player. Always wanted to be kind of Steve Largent around that. And then, in our local community, we had guys like Demetrius DeBose and Lake Dawson, who were guys that ended up going to Notre Dame. And you probably know some of those guys played with around that. And those are, guys that I looked up to in the community, and I really, really wanted to play. Another guy, Lawyer Malloy, who ended up, being an all pro, went to University of Washington. I actually played against him my senior year in high school. I finally convinced my mom my senior year in high school to play. And they give you like this sheet to sign a waiver, and you have to have your parents sign it, right, around that. So I gave it to my mom, and my mom's like, my child cannot get hit. You're not allowed to touch him. And I'm like, Mom, I'm playing football here. This isn't something you can go do. So I grew up loving sports. Sports was probably my passion as a kid growing up. I mean, I woke up with a baseball glove in my hand, or, a baseball bat in my hand, or a soccer ball in my feet, or playing pickup basketball or football with the kids in school, and finally convinced my parents to let me play. And so I went to summer camp for my senior year in high school, just before, your junior year going into your senior year in high school. Okay. And I had the whole football team. And in Washington, you'd have like your high school team would go to summer camp, and all the other local high school teams would go around. Okay. And you'd get on the 11-on-11s back then, no pads or anything like that. Around that, but you would actually, in the beginning of the week, you'd play in position groups, and I wanted to play cornerback and wide receiver. So I got into the wide receiver line, and I started playing, and my coach, Coach Nichols, recognized kind of how I played, and he goes, "Hey, I think you can play for us." And that got me pretty excited around the opportunity to play high school football. And so I actually didn't kick in high school around that, interestingly enough, because I was a soccer player, but I actually played wide receiver and cornerback in high school, and I ended up starting at wide receiver. That was, it's a pretty tough thing to do, not playing high school, not playing football, youth football at all. Sure. And just going out there and playing. I loved football around that, and it was something I always wanted to do, Chris. And so I knew athletically, there's guys like Bertrand Berry and Sean Wooden and Derek Mays and all these great athletes that we had on the team. And I knew I was not athletic enough to really play wide receiver, although I really wanted to. Sure. I love football, and I know I can kick. And in 1994, the team had struggled kicking that year. We got a lot of field goals. We had some missed PATs. So for me, going on to Notre Dame, it was like, you know what, I'm going to just go on and kick. And so I went out for the team in the spring that year, and I knew I could kick a football. It wasn't a big challenge for me to go and kick a football. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting story that I really didn't even kick in high school, and just decided, hey, you know what? I know I can kick a football, so let me go do it. And that's kind of my youth was really about sports. Seahawks were huge. I was a Seahawk fan as well. I was a University of Washington fan growing up in Seattle, so always enjoyed the Huskies. My brothers and sisters all went to the University of Washington. They're all older than me.
Okay.
And for me, I always liked Notre Dame, though. And so it was an interesting thing around that. In 1984, my parents took me, so I was about 11 years old. My parents took me to Chicago, and we drove across the country to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to go see an uncle of mine. And we're going on that 80-90 highway, and I see the University of Notre Dame signs, and I'm begging my parents in the back of the seat, can we go see that campus? And they're like, okay, on the way back, we'll do that. So they did. They drove back on the way back, and then, you know, we circled around the campus. I saw the stadium, around that, and I told my parents that, you know, when I was 11 years old, that's where I'm going to go to school. That's the place I want to go.
No way.
Yeah, and so
that's awesome.
Yeah, and I've always kind of been that kind of guy. For myself, I've set goals and had the opportunity to achieve them in my life. Been really fortunate, but also kind of a grinder around that. You know, when I set my mind to do something, I'll give you another story. When I was a kid, I told my mom and dad I want to be on the cover of the Seattle Times sports section. That's something I want to do. You know, Seattle Times being the big paper inside of there. So I got on there twice. One was for football, catching a big third down, and they had a picture of me catching a big third down against that we ended up winning. And then soccer, I was the captain of the soccer team. And so, you know, had a game-winning goal, got my picture taken on that. And so I kind of always set these goals. I wanted to walk on the Notre Dame football team, set that goal. We'll get into playing some poker. Wanted to win a World Series of Poker bracelet, you know, kind of stuck my chest out a little bit in 2009 and said, you know, within 5 years, I'm going to win one of these things. You know, did that. I wanted to be a C-level executive in corporate America, kind of accomplished that. And then I said I wanted to start my own business, you know, and sell that for millions of dollars, and got the opportunity to go do that. And so I just kind of been a guy that sets some goals and then figures out how to, you know, work backwards. So what does it take to kind of grind and achieve those things? And I consider myself a grinder around that, goal oriented, obviously.
Sure.
Around that. So, you know, a lot about myself. I know a little bit more than just my youth, but.
Well, where did this kind of grinder idea come from? I mean, was that your parents? Was it your older brothers and sisters? Well, where did it come from?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, my brothers and sisters are super intelligent. I mean, like just off the hook, intelligent people. And so I was kind of considered the dumb kid, you know, in my family around that. And so I think that put a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. When I was told I couldn't do something, you know, hey, you're too small to go do this. You can't do that. You're not fast enough, or your arm's not strong enough, or whatever it might be, especially, you know, sports being big piece of that. It always put a chip on my shoulder. And I've always been the kind of guy that hates to lose more than he loves to win. And I think that's kind of, it's been that. And so when people say I can't do something, it really kind of just motivates me to say, you know what, I can, and let me do that. And as that journey goes along, it's less so about the destination. It's more so about like the journey and the growth that you get and the self-confidence you start to build in oneself around that. I mean, when I got to the University of Notre Dame, I mean, student body was pretty smart. You know, I mean, that's not a dumb student body, and you're around a lot of it really, you know, intelligent, you know, people around that. And you know, I take some pretty bad grades when I first started, and I realized, hey, I got to compete, right? Even here, it's I got to compete in the classroom as well, and that gave me some self-confidence, you know, that I could do that as well. And I think that really helped me in my professional career, quite frankly, was being around such, you know, some amazing students. And as you probably know, the student body at Notre Dame, I mean, it's, in my opinion, second to none. I mean, just an awesome student body.
You know, well, it's really interesting, and I don't think a lot of folks know this, and maybe folks who maybe attended Notre Dame, but there's like some crazy stat out there that says like 90% of the students there earned varsity letters. Like, I think that's like so amazing. I mean, that's obviously, you look at bookstore basketball, you look at the fact that a lot of the dorms have their own sports teams.
Yep.
Which I think is amazing. And so when you talk about, you know, a pool of students, male and female, 90% of them won varsity letters. That's crazy. You want to talk about confidence, leadership? I mean, everything.
Yeah, you're spot on about that. I mean, everybody I know was, on their golf team, they were on their tennis team, soccer team, baseball team, you name it. It's absolutely the case. And I think you see that in the student body, to your point. There's a certain amount of, self-confidence. Sometimes I think people think we're a little bit arrogant, as an alumni, right, around that. But hey, it's high achieving people.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further. Sam, tell me a little bit about kind of how you got involved in athletics. I mean, you talked about your brothers and sisters kind of older. Did they participate in sports or okay?
Yeah, so my oldest brother, who's 8 years older than me,
okay,
he was huge into sports. Especially, he was the one who taught me football.
Oh, nice.
Just watching it and learning from it. The Seattle Seahawks, if you didn't know, they started in 1976. So I was born in 1973. My brother's 8 years older than me, so he's about 11 years old, and the Seahawks become a thing, right? The Mariners became a thing in the 77. So we grew up in a city that major sports was just kind of kicking off and being a thing. And my oldest brother was big time into sports, and he was the one. Imagine being a little kid. I'm 2-3 years old, watching my 10, 11-year-old brother playing sports, and I just loved it. And I wanted to compete with him even at that young of an age. I'm like, hey, I want to play on your team. I want to play against your friends. And, I'm super thankful I have two older brothers, and both of my older brothers allowed me to play with their friends, allowed me to play on their teams. And that helped me. You playing with older kids helps you, develop much quicker as an athlete around those things and as a sportsman. So, yeah, my two brothers my sister was an athlete too. My parents were a little bit more traditional, coming from Eastern culture and that kind of stuff. So my sister wasn't allowed to play too much, especially as she got older, which is a shame. She was a great athlete around that, but sports was in our bloods. My mom actually was a great athlete in India. She played on the field hockey team. She played on the soccer team. So she was, an athlete herself. And so she pushed us. When I was a kid in probably fifth grade, I didn't want to go snow skiing. I was deadly afraid to put on these snow skis and go down. My mom was like, no, you're going. And my mom had never even know what snow skiing was. And she just got me onto the ski school and said, you're going to go learn. So my parents supported us big time, coming from, I think, India and migrating over here. They wanted us to acclimate to American culture, and sports was a big thing.
Right.
In Seattle, Washington, basketball was probably the predominant sport, quite frankly, when I was growing up in Seattle around that. And so sports was just a big thing in our community. In Mercer Island, sports was a big thing. My brothers got me into it, and I always hung around the kids who played sports. And so you just, as a youth, you saw the kids that were playing in high school, and you just kind of dream of the day that put on, the Mercer Island high school jersey, and, whether it's the soccer team or the baseball team or the football team. And you just think, yeah, I want to do that someday and be that kid. And that was just how I grew up. And it was a small community, small town. Everybody kind of knew each other around that. And so, yeah, sports was just a huge part of my life. I probably have more lessons I've learned from sports, especially sports, than anything else that helped develop me as time went on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it's kind of interesting because you mentioned, so where did I'm assuming it wasn't on the trip to Pittsburgh that you all of a sudden fell in love with Notre Dame. I mean, did you know about it before? How did that get into the picture?
Yeah. So this is going to sound crazy because I was only like 4 years old, and maybe 3.5. My uncle, who had just come from India, wanted to learn about football. And I was the one that actually taught him the rules, and to the point where I was one of those kids that just loved the game, Chris. And my brother was teaching me about it. And then I found out, okay, this is holding, right? And this is personal foul, and this is flipping. And I actually learned what the refs were doing. And I was teaching my uncle at a very young age. And I can remember the moment, it was 1977. My parents took me to, I'm 4 years old, maybe 3 years old. And my parents took me to the Rose Bowl, and it was the Michigan versus University of Washington. And Warren Moon was the quarterback. Of all people, Warren Moon was the quarterback at that time. Wow. And I was a little kid, and my dad, I was complaining, I can't see because I'm just a little kid, and everybody's taller. So my dad actually put me on his shoulder and would let me watch the game from then. And my dad didn't really understand the game. So I was telling him what was going on, like, within the game. And so I just had this genuine love for the game. So, in television back then, in the late 70s and early 80s, you didn't have it like it is today where you can watch any football game pretty much that you want. So Notre Dame came on TV, especially on Sundays, recap of Notre Dame games. So Notre Dame there was football in college, and then there was Notre Dame, right? And that's just how it was, especially in the 80s growing up. So it was always something I was really, really interested in. And it probably really solidified on that trip that I wanted to go there. But more than anything else, it started to happen when I was in high school. And that's where it comes back to, Chris, you were an influence, quite frankly. Tim Brown was an influence, around that. There was players that, Notre Dame was just kind of famous for, and you had just a great story around that. And quite frankly, we talked a little bit about this just before the show that for me, seeing you as a guy who came in as a linebacker ends up being a defensive tackle, and I'm a small guy, and I just think, hey, maybe I could play. Even in high school, I'm like, hey, maybe I can do this and go out and just go give it a try. And then having the Lake Dawsons and the Demetrius Bowes and the Lawyer Malloys in our local area, even the Drew Bledsoes that played in that area, and you see them playing, you go, hey, football was a passion of mine. So I really loved it and wanted to go there. And Notre Dame and football went hand in hand. Ultimately, I actually wanted to get a business degree, and wanted to be at the time an investment banker around that. And so when I started to really think about my junior year in high school, what are the universities that were some of the best? And Notre Dame was it. And it was like, that's it. I got to go to Notre Dame. This is where I want to go. It was where I wanted to go as a youth. Football was kind of the draw. And then realizing it was one of the best business schools in the country, I was like, I'm in. I'm all in. Let me figure out a way to get there.
That's crazy. So did you have, was it like, hey, Notre Dame, Washington, Stanford, whatever, or was it just like, hey, you know what? I'm assuming you had to have a backup just in case Notre Dame didn't work out.
Yeah, so the three schools I wanted to go to was University of Notre Dame, University of North Carolina, and I think it's because they had a very good business school as well.
Okay.
Around that, I love sports. One of our basketball players, Quinn Snyder, who's actually the head coach of the Utah Jazz today.
Oh wow,
yeah. He was in my sister's age. He graduated in 1985. He went on to play at Duke University. So I followed Duke a lot in basketball just because of him, right? Around that, and saw North Carolina with Michael Jordan at the time and all that kind of stuff, right? So you just kind of love that. So sports always played an angle for me around that. And in North Carolina, I had a great business school. Really one of the top, probably 25, 30 business schools in the country. So I was like, that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to move away from home. I wanted to get out of Washington. I just wanted to go do something. That's just kind of my personality around that. But yeah, it was kind of Notre Dame or nowhere, to be honest.
Wow.
Around that, I don't know what I would have done. I did get accepted to the University of North Carolina. Ironically, I didn't get accepted to the University of Washington, which still to this day, I kind of go, what?
Really?
Yeah. And so Notre Dame was the place for me to go. And as soon as I got in, it was my mom that actually called me when she was the one who opened the letter up. And she goes, hey, I want to read this letter. And she's the one who read the letter to me about getting accepted. And she was like crying, and I was just like overjoyed. I'm like, yes, this is
Where
a dream.
Where were you at that you didn't get the mail?
School? Yeah. So no, I was probably, where was I? I was with my friend Mark Harrington. And I think maybe I should be careful where I say I was at, but let's just say let's just say we were, having a good time. It's called the Gorge. It's called the Gorge, and that's where all the free music at the time was going on. And you can imagine alternative music like Nirvana and Pearl Jam,
right?
Stone Temple Pilots, and all of those kind of bands were going on. So I was probably out there. I know I was in the car because I was with my friend Mark, and he was going to, and my friend Mark just so happened to have a cell phone, which wasn't really that was pretty unique back then.
Right.
Around that. So my mom had called Mark and told me about that. And yeah, so it was a great moment.
That's awesome, man. That is a great story, man. That's terrific. So you now are at Notre Dame.
Yep.
And you had a chance to visit, kind of drive around a little bit. You say that Lake and Demetrius were from the area. Did you know those guys? Or, did you know anybody at Notre Dame before this?
I didn't. So interesting enough, I didn't know any of them. I knew of those guys, right? You know, you learn about, you know, especially in Washington, we didn't have a ton of blue chippers that would come out of there, especially back then. So you knew the guys that were like, okay, these are the studs, and they're going to, you know, to University of Notre Dame. So I knew of them around that, but no, I didn't actually know anybody there. The first day I actually showed up to go to campus, my dad took me there and dropped me off around there. My dad, super intelligent guy. You know, he has, you know, a master's degree from Columbia University, you know, around that. And he didn't know much about Notre Dame. He thought it was kind of a football school. So when you're doing the orientation thing, he got to see, you know, what Notre Dame was about and what the academics were about. And I remember him sitting there, giving me a big hug and going, oh, wow, you picked a great school. I mean, this isn't just about sports.
That's great.
You know, and so, I mean, he's super proud about it. To this day, he wears his Notre Dame hat and just super proud about, you know, Notre Dame dad. Around that. Sometimes I feel guilty for my brothers and sisters who, you know,
That's awesome.
And then there's a piece of me going, I'm the baby brother. And it's like, yeah, all right.
I deserve this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome, man. So, I mean, when you were there, did they have a chance to come up to visit any or?
Not really. I mean, it was really graduation.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of when it went down. My parents were the type of parents that they didn't come to much of my high school you know, football games or even soccer games. It was about academics. I mean, they were like traditional, you know, Indian family, you know, like school first, you know, studies are important. So none of that was really that important to them. And it was really important to me. So there was times where I was like, Mom, Dad, you gonna come see me play or what else? But that just really wasn't that important. And they made that known. I mean, if I didn't keep my grades up, I wasn't playing any sports. And so, you know, that was a super important thing, which I think I'm super thankful of today, because I would have been a real goof off and just, you know, just played sports because I just loved it, you know, complete junkie. Man, at the time I would have just played, you know, like, you know, Nintendo and you know, and ran around and played sports all day.
I forgot about Nintendo. You're right. Or Atari, yeah.
Exactly.
So I know you're talking about your mom didn't want you to play. How did your dad feel about it? And did they go to any of the games, or they just didn't go to any high school games?
They came to 2 games, only came for the halftime around them. And it was the senior year where you're handing out kind of the flowers, right, to your parents around that. They probably won't love this story around it, but for soccer around that, one of my best friends in high school, Mark Harrington, we played soccer together in our youth, and we were both captains of the soccer team.
Okay.
And so his parents took me everywhere, right? So it was me and him going everywhere to all the games. So when I gave the flowers, I actually gave them to Mark's parents and stuff and said, hey, thank you guys for, you know, supporting me.
Right.
That. And I mean, I'll probably send a little bit of a message to my mom and dad about that. You know, but when I look back, it was a little bit of an immature moment because their support for me is second to none.
Right.
It just, sports wasn't a thing for them. You know, it just wasn't that important. And with all that said, Chris, my dad would take me to so many University of Washington games. Like he took me to the Rose Bowls. Every Rose Bowl the University of Washington went to from 1977 to 1992, they took me to it, right, around that. And my dad doesn't even like football. My dad doesn't even like football, but that's how much, you know, he didn't go to my games, but he knew how much I loved it.
Sure.
So he took it, and he owned his own business. And so there were some business aspects to it of, you know, having the season tickets, the University of Washington, taking some clients and things of that nature to it. But he would always take me to those games. And so I look back on those moments and go, you know, that was their way of, hey, you know, we understand you enjoy this, so let's go to these things. But, you know, as a kid, you're like, yeah, you kind of want mom and dad to see you. But my brothers in particular, both of them came to all of my games all the time. So they were like huge supporters of that. My senior year in high school, my oldest brother, he came to every single soccer game. My brother, who's 2 years older than me, came to every single one of the football games around that. And they were there to totally support me. And usually just the way my family is, it was usually the first thing was like, you could have done this better. You could have done that better. Yeah. And then it came into the hug and like, all right, good job. You guys won, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of funny because as you were telling the story about, you know, your mom not wanting you to play, kind of very similar situation happened to me. My mom didn't want me to play. And the coach gave me the permission slip to take home and have my parents sign it. And I gave it to my mom and she didn't. And so my first year, I didn't play at all. And it wasn't until my second year that I forged her signature on the permission slip and gave it to my coach, and I was playing. But kind of to make a long story short, when you tell that story, I just started laughing because I was like, oh my God, my mom was the exact same way. That is absolutely hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it was funny because, and I asked because my mom, she was a fan, like she was a Bears fan because we grew up in Chicago, but it wasn't, she didn't know anything about sports. She watched it, but she didn't know, like, no one in her family ever played. She never played any sports. So going to the games wasn't part of the thing. Like a lot of parents didn't go. And also we kind of lived in a kind of crazy gang, drug kind of neighborhood, stuff like that. But it was funny because my senior year, last game, of course, my coach and one of my teachers got her to go to the game. She watched the whole game like this. And after the game, she's like, wow, you're pretty good. And I was like, Mom, I got a scholarship to Notre Dame. Really? Yeah. She's like, wow, you're really good. So needless to say, she went to my home games at Notre Dame. But it was so interesting because, and I talked to guys and, their parents take them all around the country, which is great. And kind of like what you were talking about, like, I don't love my mom any less because she didn't go to my games. Mm-hmm. But it just wasn't part of it. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm curious how she felt when you start playing for the Bears, right?
Yeah. Actually, unfortunately, she actually passed away.
I'm sorry.
No, that's right. It's crazy. My senior year at Notre Dame, my last game I played was in the Orange Bowl. Yep. And I talked to my mom after the game like I always do. And, we had a little conversation. I said, bye, Mom, I love you. She said, bye, I love you too. And I went home and she had actually died of a heart attack sometime after I talked to her. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Oh, that is crazy. Oh, my God.
Which is kind of crazy.
Were you MVP of that game?
Pardon me?
Weren't you MVP of that game?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was the defensive MVP. So it's kind of weird.
The 10-9 mystery clip call on Rocket. I remember.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the game. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I always kind of wondered why I played so well, and I think that was because it was my mom's last game. So that's pretty cool. But okay, so now you're a freshman. You're enjoying the life at Notre Dame. Did you have plans on walking on? Or, what was that idea? Outside of the fact that our kickers sucked at the time.
Well, I wouldn't want to say they sucked. That's not fair. We struggled a little, Chris. We struggled. Let's not make fun of everybody else. They might see me down the road, right?
Hey, you took Sam told me. So.
Well, I always wanted to play football, and I actually was really good at soccer, right? And so I actually broke my ankle because I was going to walk onto onto the soccer team at the University of Notre Dame, and I broke my ankle, and I just kind of took a year or so off, just kind of like, okay, sports aren't really there. And then I played Flanner. I was at Flanner Hall. That was my dorm, right? So they had the inter-hall football, right? So I was like, all right, I'm going to play inter-hall football around that. And I started kicking for the inter-hall football team around that. And that's when I realized, you know what? I love this. I'm walking on to the team in the spring. Wow. So after my sophomore year, going to my junior year, I was like, I'm walking on to the football team. And that's what I did, And so that was the best experience I had, to be honest. That was a awesome moment. It's one of those moments where, tell you the story of how it actually worked out. I was walking on in the spring. So it's, the 95 spring around that. And, doing kicking. The first thing, Kurt Doll was the special teams coach. You might remember him.
Yeah.
Around that. And so he was a special team coach. So, I was lining up and it's like, we had like 6 or 7 kickers out there. And he's like, all right, go kick the kickoffs. So I do my first kickoff and it lands about the 5-yard line. He's kind of shaking his head like, yeah, we need guys to kick it in the end zone around that. And so I kicked a couple others. I couldn't get into the end zone. I didn't have that kickoff leg around that. But I remember it was like, hey, we're going to get an opportunity to kick field goals too. And so we were kicking field goals and it would start on the 30, right hash, kick, then go 35, 40, 45. And I made all of them. And so I was like, okay. So then we got to the point where it was end of practice, spring practice around that. And they blow the whistle and they make you line up and they go, all right, we're kicking the field goal. And it was like, hey, you, and points to me, goes, go kick this field goal. And a 50-yard field goal, right? We're going to go kick, right, on the practice field. And I'm like, okay. And there was one ball, okay? And there was one ball that was like pumped a little bit more air, had a little bit of roundness. I grabbed that ball and I threw it to the snapper around that. And so this was a live snap against a rush. Wanted to kind of see your pressure, right? Moment around that. Snap the ball. I smacked that thing. It hit the bar and went over around that. And the whole team erupted. We got a kicker. Yeah, we got you know how it is on the field when those moments happen around that. And so it was like, all right, man, you're here. Let's play. And that was the moment that I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I just kind of like made this team off of this one kick in this pressure moment. And I look back, Chris, and I kind of chuckle because I'm like, if that was a regular ball, I ain't hitting that 50-yard field goal. I knew which ball to go grab when he put it at the 50. Right. This is the one that I know I can smack this thing. It was more like a soccer ball than it was a football at that point.
Oh my God.
It was a great moment.
Well, to let folks also understand, like Holtz would do that where kind of the last couple seconds of practice put kind of pressure on the kicker because to my understanding, like during the practice, like y'all would like just hang out and have like Coca-Cola or something like on the sideline or something. Y'all wouldn't do anything, right?
Yeah. So stories about that. We might have gone to the senior bar once in a while.
One of the things that Holtz would do to kind of put pressure on the kicker, and then even like sometimes, I remember during just a regular practice, he would stop practice and say, all right, he would grab a kicker and say, or put the ball on whatever yard line, and then say something like, if he doesn't make it, we have to do like 10 extra sprints or something like that to practice. So we're like, what? And we're like sweating and like dying, and these kickers come over like, hey, what's up, guys? And they're trotting over. I'm like, hey, you guys didn't even practice yet. And of course, there were times when guys didn't make it. And so literally we would run after practice because this guy didn't make a field goal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can remember some of those moments. It was interesting that I don't think people fully appreciate the culture that goes on, especially back then in football. As a kicker, you weren't really part of the team, but you're part of the team in the moments of camaraderie and in times of that nature. But when it came to stuff like that, it was kind of like, I mean, if you missed it, it was like, what is this guy doing? This guy can't even kick a ball. I mean, he's out doing nothing, stretching around, walking and like drinking a soda on the sideline. We're out here, doing two-a-days, smacking each other, and the kickers are out there stretching and, getting, charted by the manager on the kicks that you're making, around that kind of stuff. And so those were interesting moments, and you never knew he was going to call. He didn't always call on the starting kicker. He just picked somebody. Right. And it was really, when I think back on it, really smart because it had us all on our toes, never knowing. And that's how a game really is at the end of the day. You just really never know if you're going to be in at that moment of time to go kick that. And it could be a quick change of possession. Like sometimes the defense is on the field. There's only 45 seconds. We're down by 3 or 4 and we get a turnover, or the punter, we get a return and you're in field goal position. And you're just like, all right, you better be ready. And, how it is. Notre Dame, it can be some cold days or you're sitting on the sideline not doing anything, or especially in practice. We got sent outside. We never got to sit in the Loftus Center. We were, at practice, there was a few kicks and that kind of stuff. And then we were sent outside for, messing around on the practice fields for a good 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half. And practices were much longer than they are in today's world, around that.
Well, it's so interesting because what Sam's talking about. So I got there in 87 and they had just opened Loftus. And what Loftus is it was our indoor facility. They've since built like 5 other ones now, but that was the original one. And I remember vividly, and I talked to Tim Brown because he was on the podcast a while back, and I asked him if he remembered this, and he kind of laughed and said, absolutely. Well, one of the first practices we had were outside. It was raining. And it was getting kind of cool, so people were kind of shivering a little bit. We were doing our calisthenics. And Tim Brown was like, Coach Holtz. He was like, yes, Timmy, what's up? He's like, Coach, it's raining outside. I said, yeah, Timmy, it's raining. He said, we got that nice facility. Let's go into Loftus because it's not going to be raining in there. And he said, in his lisp, he said, Timmy, that building is for recruiting purposes only. So we're like freezing out there in the rain. So we actually didn't. I don't remember. Like there were like. In order for us to go in there, like it had to be like torrential rainstorms. I mean, like if it was just normal rain, no problem. We were not going in there, and it was so funny. So you got to talk about that. And it was interesting because I mean, Holtz kind of always did those things, and not only to the kickers, but he would do it to just regular players. I mean, you talk about like, hey, Tony has to throw this pass. If Rocket catches it, or if Ricky catches it, whatever, we're going to take it in for practice. And of course, he'd go over and talk to Tony, and then Tony would overthrow it, so we wouldn't actually go in early. But those are some kind of amazing situations. This is the Zorich Podcast, and you are listening to myself and Sam Jaddi. So this is kind of an interesting thing, and I want to kind of get your opinion on this. I mean, being a walk-on, was it much different than not necessarily being a scholarship player, but I mean, were you treated differently by like members of the team, or was it just like one big happy family? And I mean, everything was great.
I would say that I was treated great. I mean, there wasn't an issue with that. It was being a kicker was probably more the issue than being a walk-on, right? And there wasn't, at the time, you'd have one or maybe two scholarship kickers back then that would be on the team. Most of them were walk-ons. Right. So there was just kind of an understanding of that. There was a different culture with the kickers, which I totally got. I mean, and trust me, I didn't actually want to be a kicker. I really wanted to play a wide receiver. And I realized really quickly I didn't have the athletic ability. When Bertrand Berry was faster than me, I was like, okay, this guy's like 240 and he's playing line. Right. About doing that. But no, I thought the players, after practice or you see them around, it was always kind of friendly, and there was a little bit of a different, unique camaraderie to that too at times. I think what I loved about the experience is I think we were in as much awe, and the players were in as much awe of the student body as they were with the teams, even though there was a little bit of like, oh yeah, he plays football. There was also like, yeah, this is a pretty cool guy that I was hanging out with. And the way they did things, I know when you were there and definitely when I was there, that the players, like for the most part, lived on campus, lived with regular students, right? Around, especially in Flanner Hall, around that. And so it was just a cool moment. I mean, it just, Ron Powell's up on the 5th floor in Flanner Hall, and you just, sit and say hi to him or whatever. And, it was a great thing. You had, Tom Krug, who was playing quarterback as well. And those guys were just great guys. I had Alan Rossum, who was on my floor, who was a freshman at the time around that. And that guy was fast. Holy smokes, fast. And those were the moments when I realized I just had no chance of ever. I didn't want to be a kicker, Chris. I wanted to play. You realize it's just a whole different level of athlete there. Sure. And especially at the time that I think we were there and you were there. You just had some phenomenal athletes. I mean, I think when you were there, the players that were on that team are Hall of Fame NFL football players. Crazy athletes.
So, you mentioned that moment in practice, but when you and this didn't necessarily have to be kind of an athletic experience, but can you tell me one of your fondest memories being at Notre Dame?
Yeah, there's a few around that. I would say probably the most fondest memory of being there was moments that you had with some of the student body. Like I'll give you a perfect example. So we were at the library, right? And, Hesburgh Library inside of there, and you're studying for a test and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't competitive. Like a lot of people think that Notre Dame's like super competitive, academic, and it wasn't like that. It was, everybody was helping each other out around that, like, hey, what do you think of this? How, I was a finance major, so it might be, some kind of, options or futures type of stuff. And then how do you do that? What's your thoughts about this? You're in the library and people would recognize you from class and go, hey, how do you do this around that? So I think that was one fun memory. The other one was the integrity, that people expected of you at Notre Dame. I was there in 1996, my senior year. There was a scandal that happened in the finance department where there was some cheating that happened on, one of the one of the essays or one of the things term papers we had to turn in. And they had the computer lab at the time that was there, and that DeBartolo Hall was new. It was, built in 1994. So it was a new, real fancy building back then with, internet and all that kind of stuff that was really fancy back then. People laugh about now, but that was a thing then. And so we were in the computer lab, and the people were sharing information, that kind of stuff. And Notre Dame took that kind of stuff real serious, and there was a whole investigation on it, and there was a whole thing.
Wow,
it was so it was a real interesting thing to see how honest everybody was, right? And then how Notre Dame, they were saying, hey, if you were caught, cheating on this thing, you didn't pass that, we're not going to give you an F, but you don't pass it, and you got to take that class over. And this is spring semester of your senior year, right? So they made a whole lot of students take a summer course and retake that class for that. And that taught me a lesson. Fortunately, I wasn't one of the people that was caught up in that. So it was all good. But I just see our student body so honest about it. I'm like, you got to have them, like in my mind, I'm like, this is like, they got to prove that you did it. Right.
Right. Exactly.
That wasn't the mentality. That wasn't the mentality. Wow. And so there was moments like that, Chris, that, the way people treated you academically around that, when something like that happened, the integrity kind of that student body. I mean, we're college students, right? So we always had some good times and some, some times that you rode the fence a little bit on things. Right. But to see how people were around that, I think that's why, for me personally, when I see Notre Dame resume as an example and it has Notre Dame on that, it's not just because I have Notre Dame. There's a certain character about, the person that's in there. There's a certain amount of that honesty, integrity, trust. That's built on that. And it's not to say everybody's perfect, because we're all not, but I think that's part of the culture, I think there. Another one of those moments is just when you're at the games. And even to this day, everybody stays till the end. We sing the alma mater together around that. And you rarely see the stadium leave. And I'd say there's 70% of the capacity that stays until all the way to the end, win, lose. Wow. And that kind of stuff just always has stuck with me. It's those kind of things that culture meant a lot. Yeah,
that's interesting. That's really interesting. So now you're going to graduate. Did your parents? You were saying before, did your parents come up for that?
Oh yeah. That was a big thing. My whole family was there, brothers, sisters, parents. That was a real problem. As I told you, I was considered the dumb kid in the family. Oh my God, he's the University of Notre Dame grad, and one of the best business schools in the country. And I graduated with honors, so it was just a great opportunity. And it was a proud moment. That was one of the moments where I think, I changed the eye level, I think, of my parents and my brothers and sister going, all right, well, this kid, maybe he's going to make something of himself other than, being a sports guy. I mean, my parents and my brothers and sisters, even to this day, when I talk to them, they thought I was going to be some kind of athlete, because they're like, you love sports so much. And I was a talented kid. Probably, to be honest, I probably could have gone really far if I played baseball, but I didn't. Okay. Baseball wasn't something I had as any of my brothers and sisters or anybody in pushing me on it. But I was probably a really good baseball player naturally around that. But soccer was the big thing in my family, and I love football. So it was fortunate enough in Washington, soccer's played in the spring and football is played in the fall. So I got the opportunity to play, but baseball was played in the spring. So I had to pick and choose between the two. And I just felt like, my mom, my brothers, they all played soccer, and soccer was the thing to go do. So I played that. I wouldn't say it's a regret, but I wish I'd had somebody push me, because my natural skills and my size and stuff would have played really well, played baseball. I mean, quick story on that. Todd Hollinsworth, professional baseball player, played for the Dodgers. He was on my little league team around that. And the coach would always tell me I was more talented than him. And this guy ended up playing, professional baseball. Wow. And so had the opportunity to play around a lot of great athletes in my community and that kind of stuff. So those are some of the things that, go back to the youth that kind of brings you to that perspective.
When you mentioned before, was that your mom's first time up for when you were at graduation, or she had been up before?
No, I'm thinking about that now. I was my whole family with the exception of my dad. So my dad dropped me off, and then the next time they ever came up was all for graduation. And then they've since come up to some games with me. So I've taken a few different games to come, because they all wanted to go see a Notre Dame game, and I'm like, yeah. Why don't you come? And obviously, I have 3 kids, and so all my kids have gone to a game there. and go join that. It was one of those things they were just here actually for Memorial Day weekend because they live all over the place around that. And my kids, they were teasing me about, hey, Dad, none of us went to Notre Dame. I was like, yeah, I was a little disappointed. I wish one of you guys would have gone. Or my son goes to the University of Colorado right now.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, and I just dropped him off at the airport before I took my mom to the doctor appointment. And I was just telling him about you, and I was going on the podcast, and I was telling him about, I was a big fan of Darian Hagan and Eric Bieniemy and that whole team back then. It was just a fun team to go watch.
You got a good memory. I mean, that's impressive.
I loved football. I'm like a junkie, Chris.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So now you've graduated from Notre Dame. I mean, and I know you've taken a couple jobs. I mean, what kind of did you know that you wanted to be a consultant, or, I mean, the idea of obviously, I mean, having your own businesses is important, but I mean, you just don't walk off after graduation and say, hey, I'm ready. What was that like?
Yeah. So, my brother, who's 2 years older than me, I have two brothers, one that's 8 years, another that's 2. So my brother that's 2 years older than me, he was the kind of guy that was playing around with computers back in the early 80s.
Okay.
He loved technology. I mean, he was building computer programs. I'd be out running, playing sports, and he would call me in, hey, look at this thing. And he literally in Fortran had programmed like a ball bouncing across the screen and that kind of stuff. And I'd be like, okay, can I hit
Can I go put a real ball outside?
Yeah, exactly. And so I go back around, and he would go back, but he would always teach me about what he was doing. So he was big into technology. Okay. So when I graduated Notre Dame, their career center was phenomenal, right? So especially, I graduated at the right time. I mean, there's some fortunate piece about that. 96, you have the .com blowing up. You have, technology being a big thing. So I grew up with an interest in technology because of my brother, and then just playing around with it. We were on the internet before the internet was a thing around that. And so I had 3 or 4 job opportunities. I think it was 4. I had one at Georgia Pacific to go work with them. Then I had 2 with a couple of brokerage firms out in New York around that, which I was really interested in. And then I had one with a company called Anderson Consulting that I didn't really know much about. But what was interesting is the 2 out in New York that I got the job offers with, the 2 hiring managers actually started their careers with Anderson Consulting.
Okay.
And so they explained to me kind of like, hey, you're going to get grinded 80 hours a week. You're going to be like a credit analyst, grinding through some reports. But if you go there, you're going to learn some more business acumen around that. So then when I went to Anderson, I saw what they were about, and that really helped me kind of make that decision. They were the lowest offer, by the way, by a significant amount. My dad still picks on me about that. And says,
what's your name? You're honest. Come on. You're not smart enough.
Because I said, this is like a company that I think I understood, and I had an inclination for technology. So I enjoyed technology. Okay. And they were a technology consulting firm. So I started with them in Chicago, 33 West Monroe. So I was living in Chicago. I got married, that kind of stuff. And, just started my career with Anderson. And it was all about technology consulting. At the time, it was all about automation. We were automating a lot of business processes, things that are called enterprise resource planning and customer relationship management systems, and putting up networks and all kinds of stuff that needed to happen way back then around that. So I had an inclination for it, and I love the business aspect of it. So it was taking, my business acumen that I learned a little bit at Notre Dame. Also, I had a genuine love when I was the kind of kid who was reading the Wall Street Journal and, stuff like that, just kind of, especially in high school and in college, and really just interested and fascinated by it. My favorite movie was Pretty Woman. I think I wanted to be Richard Gere, that kind of stuff around it. So I had this genuine passion for business and technology. And so that got me into the consulting around that. And my career kind of just continued to stay in the consulting realm. Even to today, I kind of own my own company now as, a digital accelerator and really kind of digitizing businesses today. I have a couple of clients that working on some stuff. Unfortunately, I can't share too much of it around that, but really enjoyed that. So my career progression went there. And after Anderson, I actually went to a startup company called EggRock that got brought out by a company called Breakaway Solutions. And they were what we consider cloud computing today. Oh, wow. They were doing that back in 2000. And at the time, it was called an application service provider. Okay. And so without getting all techie and geeky around all of this stuff, ultimately, I've always kind of been an innovator when it came to technology and business. which gave me that entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
To go into that. And interesting enough, in 2005, and this kind of gets into the poker story of things. In 2005, I was working for Tyco ADT Securities, and I had a friend of mine who said, "Man, you're really smart. You're an intelligent guy, hard worker, but man, you don't know how to read a room. You're in these meetings and you're just all about like, the information you're giving off, and you got to read kind of the executive team and the management team." And he goes, "I think you should pick up poker." And so he was the one who said, "Go onto a poker table, but don't look at your cards. Just start to pay attention to people, right? And start to understand how they're paying attention to the game and what they're doing and what they're talking about, and pick up how their feet move and their hands move and they're leaning in and leading out, and how their eyes focus on the cards and their chips and all kinds of stuff that was all about reading people." Wow. And so I actually got into poker because of him saying, "Hey, go learn about this skill." So I did, and I lost a bunch of money, playing it and not knowing what I was doing around that. And I love playing cards as a kid. So in high school, I played a lot of spades, and then in college played a lot of hearts. And so I was always playing cards. Cards was something I grew up with. And so it wasn't that I didn't understand how to play poker. I knew how to play the game, but that wasn't the purpose of getting into it.
Right.
So I started to get into it, and I started to enjoy it. It was kind of a fun little hobby to get into. And then in 2008, my buddy, he took me to the World Series of Poker, and I went there for the first time, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." It was sports all over again, Chris. It was that competitive feeling again. It was like, "Oh, this is really cool." I'd aged to the point where I wasn't going to go play any, sports competitively other than maybe some men's league type stuff, right? Some softball.
So before you go on there, Sam, can you explain a little bit about kind of what the World Series of Poker? I mean, it's literally thousands of people, and they have a gazillion different games that are kind of official World Series of Poker games, and then they got a gazillion kind of, just kind of personal games what are going on. But I mean, it's literally like a yearly event. Yeah. And I mean, it's thousands of people who like literally come to Vegas to play in this game. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So the World Series of Poker it's probably the premier poker event where you have, if anybody's familiar with poker, the Daniel Negreanu's and the Phil Hellmuths and the Johnny Chans and the Doyle Brunsons, the guys who were kind of the founders of these games, who are some of the best players in the world. They all come and play. And what's neat about the World Series of Poker is to your point is all the different variants of poker. If you played home poker games, there's 7-card, stud and 5-card draw. And, and there's a ton of other variants of the game. No Limit Hold'em being kind of the Cadillac of poker. It's because, at any moment of time, all your chips are on the table because it's no limit around that. So poker, it's become really popular. If you're watching ESPN during the World Series, they'll have the main event. There's the Chris Moneymakers of the world that have won. And, the cool part about poker is anybody can play. And it's the only sport that I know of that you can play against the best in the world just by having the money to go buy in. You can't play tennis and go play against, some of the best tennis players in the world around that. You can't play golf and go play against Tiger Woods, and you can't play football and go play against, some of the great football players, me being a Seattle guy, Russell Wilson, around that. That's just not something you can go do, right? You got to be that kind of athlete. But in poker, you get the opportunity to compete with the best in the world. Around that. So poker it's become a really popular sport over the years around that. And it's a skill game. People think it's gambling and people think it's luck, but if you look at the consistent winners, Phil Hellmuth doesn't win 15 bracelets just because he's lucky. He has a considerable amount of skill in order to go do that around that. And so there's a skill to the game around that. And I got the opportunity to dig in. And so like you said, in 2008, when my buddy took me to that, I realized this is something I really want to get into. So then in 2009, I went back out and I played in my first event. And the funny part about playing in that first event, it's these events are 3 days up to 10, 11 days long to win one of these things. It's a grind. You're playing 10, 12 hours of cards around that. And you bag up and you play the next day, and you bag up and you play the next day just to get into the money and go do those things. So in 2009, I bought into my first tournament ever. It was a $1,500 tournament. It was a lot of money to go spend. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy into this tournament. And I got pocket tens early in that tournament. Safe to say I busted out against pocket aces less than an hour into this tournament, right? So I'm with a couple of buddies of mine, and I'm like, our little text chat, and I'm like, yeah, I'm out. I'm out around this. But that was a moment, and it's probably been a moment in all of my life. It's the moments that I didn't succeed that gave me that grit you talked about, gave me that I hate to lose more than I like to win, that gave me that feeling of like, you know what, I can do this. And so from 2009, I played in another event. I ended up cashing in that other event. I had won a tournament earlier in that year at the Venetian, and I made like $27,000, and I'd made that. So it gave me a little confidence. Okay, I can play this game a little bit. And from that moment forward, I played poker up until 2015 only to win a World Series of Poker bracelet. That was it. Whether it was cash games, whether it was tournaments anywhere. And I studied everything you possibly could, Chris, about it. I mean, I studied the structures.
Really?
I studied where the bathrooms were. I studied how to eat, how to sleep, how to meditate, how to rest. I mean, I literally spent tens of thousands of hours learning what it was going to take to win a World Series of Poker bracelet. And I said it, and I had a group of guys, and in Florida, there's a lot of really good youth players at the time that are 10, 15 years younger than me. The Brian Hastings of the world, the Jason Merciers of the world, the Grinder who was, Michael Mizuraki of the world. They're all from Florida. And so there was a group of people that knew them who I was talking with, that they were like, not the same caliber of players with them, but were really good players. And I told them I'm going to win this. And they laughed at me and said, there's no way, you know how hard it is to win a World Series of Poker bracelet. And that was the moment, Chris, that I was like, all right, you don't think I'm capable? And so I studied this thing over and over and over again. And I didn't play every year. I took a couple of years in between off as I was starting my own company around that. But I knew there was a moment where I knew if I got deep enough, I had a chance to win this, because I play to win, and I'm not playing to ladder up. I'm not playing to just, get some additional money. And there's big money on these final tables when you get there. And it was a funny moment when I was on the table. I can remember looking around at the table and seeing every time somebody busted out, they're looking up and looking to see, and I was like, I'm bluffing you. I'm coming after your chips, because I knew that the money meant more to them to win. And I was fortunate enough that I've done well financially in my career, that the money wasn't the motivator for me. It was, I want to win this bracelet, and I want to win around that. And I know I was lucky, Chris. I mean, there's no way you win one of these tournaments. You got to have some skill, but you got to have some luck. I mean, there is no doubt about it. I ran well. I got lucky in the right moments around that. And I, you can go back and you can actually look at the final table in 2014, and you can see all the hands that I played and go against it. Man, did I run well in a lot of spots. And
I was doing a little research, and it talked about how you were down to like 16 grand in chips.
I was down to, so I was down
and
to.
And the blinds were like, and again, people who don't understand this, can you just guide them a little bit about kind of how crazy that situation was that you were in?
Yeah, so it comes back to my mom a little bit. So my mom loves poker, guys. So my mom's a huge poker fan. All right, she's watched me play poker more than ever playing any sports. So she loves poker. That's been a thing for her. And I remember it was 40 players left in the tournament. It's day 2 of the tournament. It's late. There was probably 2,500, maybe 2,600 people that started this tournament. So a lot of people are down to 40 people that are left. And it was the hand before the break that, you have a break every 2 hours, you get a 20-minute break. So it's the hand before the break. And I have a decent amount of chips at the moment in time. And I got into this big hand and I bluffed it off, to be honest. And I was left with, at the time, was 1.5 big blind. Like, it basically was a ante in a big blind. I literally, and I was under the gun. So the very next hand, when I came back from break, I was under the gun. The very next hand, I was in the big blind. So I literally had 2 hands to play, and that's all the chips I had to play. So I was either going to double up, make some chips, or I was gone, and I was busting out. And so there was this moment, I called my mom on the break, and I was all like, Mom, I can't believe I just did this.
Wow.
And she was the one that says, calm down, relax. You still got a chance. You still got a chips. You still got an opportunity to win this thing. And she calmed me down. I said, all right, Mom, I appreciate that. So I walked back to the table, and I got to the table a little bit early before break, about 3-4 minutes before. And I sat down at the table, and I took my 16,000 chips and I put them in the middle, because I was the first to act. So those that don't know poker, there's an order by which you go around and you get an opportunity to play your cards. And I'm the first person to act, so I'm allowed to put my chips in the middle before they even deal the cards, because I can do that if you want to, which is not a typical thing. Most people don't do that. But I knew that I put in my ante, and the next hand I'm going blind. Anyways, I'm forced to be all in. So I'm like, you know what? I get more chips if I win now than when I'm in the big blind. So I might as well just go all in under the gun. And so I did. I went all in under the gun. And it was a cool moment because a guy raised, the big blind called, and they checked down to the river. And then the guy, one of the guys, I can't remember which one, bet, and the other guy folded. So we didn't have to show our cards yet. So he flips over. He had ace king on a king high board around that. And so I go, oh, you guys want to sweat this? I never even looked at my hand, Chris. I didn't look at my hand at all. I just all in. Yeah, I didn't look at my hand. I'm like, I'm all in. It doesn't matter around this. So I go, you guys want to sweat this? And everybody on the table was like, yeah. So I flip over. The board was king, 7, 9, jack, 10. Okay, that was the board around that. So it didn't really matter what the board ultimately was. I flip over the first hand and I hit a 10. I'm like, oh, I got a chance. I'm still in this because he had ace king. He had top pair, top kicker at the time. Right. So I'm like, okay. And I slowly peel off the second one. It's a jack. And I'm like, oh my God, amazing. So I end up, more than tripling up because of the antes and these two guys going in. The very next hand, I'm in the big blind. And it folds around to the small blind. And he has a lot of chips. And he had just lost that hand to me. But he has a ton of mounds of chips. And I still have not a lot of chips. And he just goes all in on me, which is the right kind of mathematical play to go in because I'm forced to make a tough decision. I wake up with pocket nines, right? So I'm like, okay. I call. He had like ace 4 or something, and it ran out. I won, right? So now I'm up to about 16, 17, maybe 14, 15 big blinds at that point. So I'm kind of in the game a little bit. Well, literally the very next hand, it folds around to me. I'm in the small blind. I look up, I have ace queen, right? And I'm like, okay. I just shove all in. And this guy wakes up with ace jack right next to me. I run out. I win, right? Queen plays. I win on this board. And all of a sudden I'm on 30 big blinds. And the rest is kind of history from that one. I literally went on. I came into day 3, I think like either 23rd or 24th in chips out of 26 players left. So I was still really low on chips coming into that day. Wow. And I shucked and dived a little bit. I made some good timely bluffs. I built my chips up, and then I ran over the table on the final table. I mean, I got to the final table. I was probably 4th or 5th in chips. I made even a little bit lower in chips. But I could tell everybody was a little bit tight, and nobody really wanted to bust out. So I was just raising and betting, and I was running over the table. And it just so happened every time I had a hand and somebody pushed me, I had a better hand than them. And so that's what I'm saying. The momentum kind of built up, and I got lucky. I busted out the first 5 people on that final table.
Wow.
Which is totally unusual. And for those that don't know poker, it's just really rare that one guy is just running over the table and taking. So there's 9 people on a final table when you're playing a final table around that. And to take out the first 5 people on the final table was a pretty amazing moment around that. I had a lot of fun. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of stories. I can bore you to death on kind of stories that happened around that.
Well, but I mean, what's the culture kind of after you've won a bracelet? I mean, are you now kind of invited to the private games? Are you kind of like, does the door open for things that haven't even seen before? Or I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that happen with that. So the first one is you get recognized by the World Series, of course, right? You get your bracelet, but you get a diamond card, right? So you get a diamond card to Caesars around that.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And then you also get for life, there's like the regular line to wait in to register for the tournament. And then there's the VIP line to go in for the tournament. So you always get to go on the VIP line. So there's that little cultural piece that goes in that, which kind of feels fun around that. And then there's the sharks, right? There's a guy who plays poker for a living, and they know that you won. And so, yeah, you get invited to some higher game cash games. They're like, oh, you want a bunch of money, so why don't you come play and dump it off to us? Because these guys would kill me, all right? The pro players would destroy me in cash games. Now, if we're playing a no-limit hold'em World Series of Poker event, I can compete, okay? I can compete in that.
So hold on. Can you explain that to folks? Because there's what is called kind of a cash game where literally you're playing what you have in your pocket, and then a tournament's different. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah. So in cash games, exactly what you said, you have a small blind and a big blind, and there's a fixed amount for those blinds, and they never change. They stay the same the entire cash game. And then you have as much money as you possibly want to have, and you can just keep buying in. So you never really lose unless you run out of money, and you can just play as long as you want. You can play for 1 hour. You can play for, people do 72, 40, 80 hours in a row, right? Kind of playing on that. And the blind structure never changes. So it's the same game the whole time. And the only thing that changes is the amount of chips you decide to have in front of you. And you can buy in for more chips if you want, if you lose a hand around that. And so it's I would say it's a more mathematical style game because of that. Although that's not completely true, but just generically, it's a little bit more of a mathematical style game because you're going to play the odds. If you got a 51% advantage every time in a cash game, you could take it. And in the long run, you're going to make money, 1% advantage.
Right.
Well, in a tournament, it's a little bit different because even though you might have a 51% advantage mathematically in the hand, if you lose, you're out, and that's it. And then the blind structures change constantly. In a World Series event, if it's not the main event, it's every hour. If it's a World Series event, it's every 2 hours. The blinds go up. And then antes get introduced. So there's more money going. You're forced to play, bottom line, in a tournament because it has to end, right? At some point, you got to end it. So they continue to increase the blinds on that. So tournament poker is a different game than that because now there's a risk of busting out, right, in a tournament. And so the bluffing is a little bit different in those scenarios when you're doing that. There's a little bit more of it in some scenarios. And then there's people who are willing to fold a lot of really big hands. We're in a cash game. They're like, yeah, just show me that you got your set because I got aces.
Right.
In a tournament, you'll get people to fold some really, really big hands, right? Especially when you have the chips and they don't. So there's different strategies that get into how you play your chips. Your chips are really, really important. There's even like mathematics around this kind of thing called ICM, which is independent chip model, that you actually study. Like your chips are worth more money than the actual value of them at the time because having chips are more important than sometimes even accumulating chips. So it's more important to keep your chips than it is to actually accumulate chips in a tournament during certain perspectives and certain scenarios on that. That goes into that. And quite frankly, I throw a lot of that out the door, which makes me a little bit, kind of a maniac player at times around that. Because the professional player will be like, what are you doing there? But for me, it's like, I'm going for the win. Like, I'm okay. I'm totally okay losing around this spot because I'm going to put the ultimate pressure onto you and make the decision. So for me, I try to make my opponent make the tough decision, not me. Around that. So I'm raising and I'm putting pressure on my opponents all the time and making them think, does he have it? Does he not have it? Should I call?
Right.
Should I not call? So poker is it's like a real competitive game. It's an emotional game. What people don't realize about it is especially when you're playing tournament poker and you start to get later into the tournament, your emotions play a lot into how you start playing your hands. Like let's say you have mounds of chips, right? And you got all kinds of chips and then you lose a big hand and you lose it all. Relative, you still might have a lot of chips relative to everybody else, but what you feel at that moment is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just lost all these chips. I mean, I had so much. And so you start playing a little bit different around that. So controlling your emotions is a really, really big thing when it comes to poker. And in the World Series, kind of getting back to what you asked, how does that feel? Like, people can invite you to that, but there's this amazing feeling. You have tens of thousands of people coming in and out of the Rio in the world, in Las Vegas, trying to chase this bracelet, right? Trying to chase this glory of winning around that. And when you win, there's this real interesting feeling of being a champion, right? And there's this, it's not arrogant, it's not confident, and sometimes it's humbling, right? Feeling, but it's like you've accomplished that thing that everybody is in here chasing to go do. It's like, I think it would be the equivalent if you're in the NFL and you win a Super Bowl, or you're in college football and you win a national championship. There's that feeling that you won a national championship, right? You've done that. And, everybody who's playing college football is chasing that. Right. And so when you've done that, it's a great feeling of accomplishment. And an individual thing like the World Series, where it's not a team thing, that was the awesome moment. So I think people look you up. So you can look me up on the Hendon Mob and you could, kind of search me and you could see my poker results. Well, when you get to a day 2 of a tournament, they list all the players you're playing against, right, at that moment in time. And so people go look you up. And so that every time I get into day 2, they look around and there's a little bit of a smile and there's a little bit like, oh, this guy won a bracelet over there. So it's interesting because it plays sometimes to my advantage and sometimes it plays to my disadvantage, because people that know that you won, they know that you're capable of bluffs, right? Around that. So sometimes they'll call you down a little bit lighter than you to. And then other people want to avoid you. They're like, oh, I don't want to play against this guy, around that. So yeah, those things that go into the game become an interesting dilemma that you have. And so I pay attention to it. Like I said, I started playing poker because a guy gave me advice of how to manage myself in a boardroom around that. And so that's why I played. And so I feel like my skill of instinct and reading the table is just as high as kind of my analytical brain and math around that. And I've started to study the game into depths that probably, are probably way off on the geeky end. There's things called solvers. And I literally go through this mathematical solvers to understand how you'd play certain situations and what the mathematical advantage of it is. Yeah. So so for me, I feel like I got a little bit of both sides of playing that. The game has gotten a lot tougher though, Chris. I mean, the younger kids that play this game and, man, their mathematical ability to play the game is phenomenal. I mean, it's, they've taken it to a different level.
I don't talk about the younger kids. I'm talking about you. So, kind of walk us through kind of like the last hand. Do you remember? I'm assuming you remember what you had, right? What your cards were, right?
Yeah.
I'm surprised they're not tattooed on your forehead, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, kind of walk us through kind of the last hand and literally kind of like when, and I don't know what it was, when it flipped over or whatever, but when you were kind of like, okay, wow, I won this. And as people are cheering, it's kind of like, was it, hey, yeah, I won this, or was like, oh shit, like I just won, like, or kind of for me, like when, you talk about national championship, the part I remember is, I don't remember the fans cheering and everything. I just remember kind of sitting there going, wow, we just won a national championship. And it was kind of quiet. So I'm just kind of curious on what it kind of felt for you.
Oh, that's so awesome that you just said that, because that's almost like identical to my feelings. So I won't bore you into the details of how we got up to it, because there was a reason why I made the call that I made. But ultimately, Brandon Hall, who was the guy I was going up against, he went all in. I called him with queen 10 of hearts around that, and he had ace deuce. So he was actually ahead of me technically, mathematically around that. Slight edge, probably like 58% to 42. He had an advantage on me on that. And the flop came with 2 hearts, but it was an ace on the flop. So he was ahead, but I still had a flush draw opportunity on that. And the turn came the 2. And I initially saw the 2, but I saw it was a heart. So I actually hit the flush. He had 2 pair around that. And there was a brick river. And so I ended up winning, the tournament at that moment in time. It was really interesting. It was very quiet moment. I can remember it was like a sigh of relief. It wasn't like joy initially. It was like, whew, okay, I won this thing. And then it didn't really completely hit me until the following day around that. And when you had the bracelet ceremony and you get up on the stage and like, here's Sam Jaddi, he just won his first bracelet. That's when it really, really hit me, was kind of the ceremony. But I remember, first thing I did after I won that, go up saying hi to Jack Ethel, and and they're talking to you about that. And like, hey, we want to interview. And I go, hey, before the interview, can I take a few moments and I want to call my mom?
Oh, right? Nice.
So the first thing I did is I called my mom, and it's funny thing is this tournament was being live streamed, so you could watch it live stream on that. My mom was watching live stream. Well, she didn't know that is a 30-minute delay. So obviously, you don't want to see whole cards and see that kind of stuff, right? So it was a 30-minute delay on that. So I called her and I said, hey, Mom, I just won. She's like, shh, Sam, be quiet. I'm watching you right now. Mom, I won. And she's like, okay, call me back later. Bye. She had to watch it herself. Because I was
that's
okay,
priceless, dude. That's priceless.
It was an awesome moment around that, but it didn't really hit me around that. I remember in the interview, and it's somewhere out on YouTube or something with me in the interview. I just remember the interview, and they asked me, so what are you gonna do with this? I'm like, I'm gonna take care of my kids' education. I'm gonna invest this money in my business and grow that business around. And that's exactly what I ended up doing with the money. But it was the next day, Chris. It was the next day. I remember waking up. I remember going into the Rio. I went to talk to them because they said, hey, come at like 11 o'clock. And they'll tell you what you got to go do. And at 2:00, they'll have the ceremony. Well, I was actually sitting on another table because I bought into another tournament. And I was like, all right, sitting at the table, playing on the tournament. Actually, I take it back. I was actually in the main event. So I'd bought into the main event, into that tournament. I was sitting on my table at the main event, and it was an hour into the main event or 2 hours in the main event. And this is the first break. They announced who the bracelet winner was for the previous tournament. And so I get up off my table, right? Nobody on the table knows this yet. And I get off my table and I go up there and come back. And then when I come back onto the table, everybody's like, oh, man, we're playing against this guy around that. And that's when it hit me. That was the moment that it hit me. I'm like, holy smokes, I'm a bracelet winner. And at the time, there was less than 1,000 people that have ever won these bracelets. I mean, it's a really, really rare thing to go do. And if you get it down to a no-limit hold'em tournament event, I mean, it's a really, really rare thing to go to. I mean, to be in the class of less than 1,000 people on the planet that have ever won one of these bracelets is just an awesome feeling to go and accomplish. And it was something that I said I was going to go do, and to go and accomplish it was just one of those feelings of just, like I said, it was initially a sense of relief. That was the sense of joy. And then there was probably that sense of a little bit of, pride. Every time, even to this day, every time I walk into that world, there's a little bit of this smirk, a little bit of this smile, because I know what everybody's chasing. And I go, yeah, I've been there around that. And by the way, I still want to win another one someday around that, but I'm not calling my shot on this one, because I know how lucky you gotta be around that. But yeah, I still want to play, and I still want to compete. It's one of those things I think you probably got in the sense as we've talking that, competing is something that's always been kind of important in my life. Sure. And that just gave me that outlet to compete in something else, in something that you can call yourself a world champion in, right? That's just something that, you just can't do in many things in life. And to be able to do that was an awesome feeling. So that's my poker story around that. And it was a awesome experience. And I do have some good skills. I mean, I feel pretty good about how I can play around that, but there's a lot of luck to it, so those that are poker players that might be watching this, they know I was lucky. Well,
I mean, when you were starting, and I know you kind of did all this research and you kind of really got in depth, was there someone that you kind of maybe modeled your game after, or was there a book that you kind of read 3 or 4 times through versus other books? I mean, when you're walking into it kind of literally naked and not knowing what the hell is going on, I mean, who did you identify with first, I guess?
Yeah, that's great. So who did I identify with? Interestingly enough, and I'll get made fun of this by the poker community a little bit, but I identified with Phil Hellmuth, which is he was one of the best in the world, right, yes, at doing it. But the way he kind of played, he doesn't play a traditional style game. If you compared him to Phil Ivey, or you compared him to even a Doug Polk, or some of the other stars that are out there that play a more mathematical, okay, what they call GTO, game theory optimal play, Phil doesn't play that way. Phil plays what he calls, white magic, and he plays with this instinct around that, and he plays with, I'm going to protect my chips at all cost around that. But he knows how to bluff, and he knows how to do a bunch of different things, right? I mean, he obviously wouldn't be the best, WSOP player in the world in 115 bracelets if it wasn't, that way. So interesting enough, I kind of identified a little bit with him around that. But I studied. I read over 15, 20 books at least around this, whether it be, Harrington for Hold'em, whether it be Daniel Negreanu's Small Ball, whether it be Phil Hellmuth's books. Any books I could get Solansky, any books I could get my hands on. Wow. I'd be in Barnes and Noble, just picking books and reading through these things, learning about them. And there was forums. So there's a thing called 2+2 forums that just a wealth of knowledge of poker players who were talking about all kinds of different things. And then I got into a little bit of online poker, not to play and win online poker. I used online poker as a training ground for me, so I could learn how to play the mathematics of the game and study different techniques and learn betting patterns, because you're not sitting around and learning people anymore. Right. You're just playing on a computer. And so how people bet, I start to get to betting patterns. There's a bet, raise, and there's a bet, check, raise. And those things during different streets, you can start to pick up patterns of what those things meant, right, around that. So I started to pick up how people bet and the bet sizes that they would have. And a lot of the mathematics that went into the game, not just the cards that you had and the cards that you played against, but also the betting patterns and the betting sizes and what those things really meant. So I used online poker to really just be a complete training ground for me. And I couldn't spend as much time in a casino. I mean, I got my full-time job. I'm my kids' soccer teams, and I got my, I didn't have a chance to grind out, 40, 80 hours a week playing poker. Right. What I could do is I could play 6 to 8 tables at once and playing a mathematical style. And all of a sudden I'm playing, 500 hands in a 2-hour session, maybe even 600, 700, 800 hands or more in a session, which would take you 3 days to play live. Sure. So I could start to, what I thought, keep up, right, and compete around it. And again, I'm playing only tournament poker at that time. When I'm playing the poker, I wasn't playing that tournament to win. I was playing to learn about how to play the WSOP tournament, even though I'm playing in some other tournament around it. That was the goal. The goal wasn't to be the best poker player in the world. The goal wasn't to be a cash game player. The goal wasn't even to win, some other local tournament, even though I've won a few of those. The goal was to be a WSOP, bracelet winner. And so that's how I really went into it. And I think that really helped me, quite frankly, because I was zeroed in on, just so many little things, the table break order, there's just so many little things that go into a tournament, how to get the right sleep, because you get tired, your mind gets going around these things, and you have a hard time sleeping. And so I learned to meditate.
So I'm sorry, go ahead. Really?
Yeah. So I learned to meditate, and I still do that to this day, where all it is controlled breathing at the end of the day for me. And I know, I could do that right now as we're talking, and I could slow my conversation down. I could slow my thought process down and begin to maybe even focus on your body language, right? And your different pieces. And so really what meditation comes down to is getting away all the thoughts and being able to narrowly focus on something, right, around that. And so I learned to do that really, really helped me, because you got a million thoughts going through your head every day, every second around that. And so I learned to really do that. And that really got me focused into how to play the game. Like I said, I took a lot of steps to get to that level. So I feel like I earned it, even though I know I got lucky in that moment, no doubt about it.
It's you have to know something in order to be at the table. Flat out. I mean, the luck can only take you so far. And although, yes, it's a game of chance, but still the idea of playing the 2 cards you have in front of you in a certain way, when others may fold, when others may raise, you do something. I mean, that's skill. That is skill. Talking from a person who's hasn't won anything. I think I won there was a semi-celebrity poker tournament at a local casino, I think in Indiana. And I went with some friends, and it was funny because I enjoy playing with my friends. And so for me, poker's a social event. Now, I mean, I've seen thousands of World Series of Pokers. I remember Poker Stars, and I remember all that stuff, right? But I just like the camaraderie. And the guys I play with, they will tell you that. And when I went to this tournament, I went with my friends, and they got knocked out. And, I started I was one of the only few people there. Then it kind of went down from 10 to 8 to 9. And then I remember it was me and this chick. And, and at the time they kind of announced it. So literally everybody kind of in the casino. And again, this is a small casino, I forgot where it was, Indiana. I mean, this is not, and it was at this point, it was midnight or something like that. And I remember thinking and she was really aggressive. And I was like, she wants this way more than I do. And again, it was all my guys. And then it was late. So my guys left. And by the way, I have 2 dogs at home that I know haven't been out for the last 6 hours. I know that they took a dump in the basement. I'm going to have to clean that up. So I'm sitting there going, man, you know what? I don't even want to. My guys are gone, and I remember I'm sorry, I didn't win it. I came in second, but it was more I was I'm ready to go, and so I kind of went all in on nothing. And she was up there, I got you, and it was Like, hey, all right, great, And then they gave me a little receipt thing. I'm like, all right, cool. I'll go down to the cage. All right, great. And it was so interesting because at that time, and this is totally different than what you're talking about, but this is kind of a local experience that the people that play at casinos, they're grinders. I mean, they're there hours and hours, and I'm there with my buddies having a good time, having a couple cocktails. And so for me, man, this is social. And that's when I knew, like, after I won, and everybody's kind of like, and I remember this chick was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, wow, you won. I'm like, have you not ever won anything before? Like, be humble a little bit. But then it was so interesting because I know that, and then I know I shocked everybody at the casino because they knew I played, but they're like, yeah, we'll buy in for you. So I didn't have to buy in. And I think it was just more like, hey, we could just have this ex-Chicago Bear there, so they can kind of pump that up. They weren't thinking I was going to get down to the final two by any means. But it was just so interesting because, like, I saw, like, in folks' eyes, like, they were like, one, he doesn't belong here, which I totally did not. But it was just a totally different game. Like, I'm used to my teamwork is with my buddies and having a good time. And these folks, I mean, they were grind. And you obviously know what I'm talking about, but I mean, these folks, they were there for hours and hours and hours. And I was just like, whoa. And it's so funny because from that experience, like, I'll watch World Series of Poker, stuff like that, and I'll play with folks, but it's that camaraderie that I look for. It's not like this idea of wanting to kind of decimate you. Now, granted, I mean, I got some buddies that are gonna watch the show and they're like, yeah, that's me. He's talking about me. Which, I mean, I got some boys who, like, they will play until you bleed. I mean, they don't care. But for me, it's just not that fun. And I don't know if it's because, like, I'm not that into the game, but I just enjoy kind of that social part. So it was just so interesting that I saw, like, a small bit of what you must see kind of daily being in that environment where, like, literally, I mean, folks, and then some of them are making their living. Now, again, we're talking about the small casino in Indiana. They're paying their mortgage off this $5-10 game, right? And I'm just like, whoa, I'm definitely in the wrong place. Like, I want to hang out. I want to talk to my boys at the other table, So needless to say, I mean, I love the game, and having a chance to kind of hear you talk about it is just fascinating because you kind of walked us through kind of what it took to really kind of win. And for folks that don't know, and you kind of talked about a little bit, I mean, this is so hard to do. When you say Phil Hellmuth won 15 bracelets, how many tournaments do you think that he played in order to win those 15? I mean, thousands, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, It is so rare.
It is rare. And you're right. There's an intensity. So I have two sides of poker for me. So I enjoy the social aspect too, Chris. So if you see me playing in a cash game, if you see me in a tournament, I'm a different player, right? I'm in it to win, right? And so like, I'm gonna be cutthroat. But if you see me in a cash game, I'm just having a good time. It's a social thing for me. I'm just out having a good time. And so people are like, this guy's the World Series of Poker Bracelet on because it's a cash game. I'm just socially having a good time. Right. But what I've learned in the WSOP in particular is people are so intense. They get their headphones on and they're all like, this is like real serious. I realize being social in those moments and table talking and bringing out actually gives a little bit of an advantage.
I could imagine, yeah.
Around that. So you'll see me, around when I'm playing, I'm pretty social at the table. I'm not, although trust me, I'm a shark.
Sure, no, absolutely.
I'm going for it. So I'm trying to get information from you around it, but I'm going to make it fun. I'm like, hey, anybody want to drink? Anybody want to, have a good time? That kind of stuff. And then just, hey, where are you from? What brought you out here? That kind of stuff. And we're going to have, a good conversation. And I actually get annoyed at times when it gets to the point where everybody's so serious because it really gets boring. I mean, let's just be real about it. It gets pretty boring when everybody's just super serious about it, but there's ways to take advantage of people who play that way too. Around that. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying around that. I am a competitor though. So like, I want to win. I mean, that's
you're a competitor. I mean, this is, for folks that don't, I mean, again, this is like, I mean, I feel as though because seen the game. And I mean, I have like Bill Brunson's book. I've had some of the books that you mentioned. I mean, so I was in it back when you could play online and it was on TV literally like 2 or 3 times a week. I was into all that stuff. But this is just so rare. So I think one of the reasons kind of how we met, we actually met on social media, and I forgot, I think you commented on something about Notre Dame.
Yep.
And at that point, I either, you know what it was, and I didn't have a chance to look at it, but I think I knew you were a World Series of Poker winner, bracelet winner. You commented on Notre Dame, and I was like, holy shit. I was like, hey, man, this is awesome. Hey, what's up, man? And then you were like, yeah, I went to Notre Dame, and I also walked down. I was like, holy crap. So I think that's kind of how I got really excited. But, it's so funny because – and the reason why I got so excited was because it's so far out of kind of what you expect the typical Notre Dame graduate to accomplish.
Yep.
I mean, I can guarantee you, not only are you one of 1,000 people with this bracelet, I can probably guarantee, although I'm sure you may know, you're probably maybe the only Notre Dame graduate with a bracelet.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's possible.
That's probably likely. I mean, probably really like, there's only like 1,000 of them, right? So, I mean, how many of those are going to be a Notre Dame grad? Probably pretty low.
Right.
It's funny you bring that up because when I started playing in 2005, I was actually wanted to hide that I played. I wouldn't actually come out and say it to people. And I didn't want people to know because there was a little bit of a stigma with it. And I'm in kind of corporate America around that. And then it's funny how it's really shifted over the last 10, 15 years. Ever since Moneymaker kind of won, it started to slowly shift, but really when online poker became a thing, it really shifted because the regular, corporate American guy was playing, online and that kind of stuff. And now it's really interesting because people, they'll look me up. I'll have some business meeting. They'll look me up. And the first thing that comes up is like, where else there's a poker bracelet. And that becomes a topic of conversation. And there's nothing to really hide from it. Around that anymore. But yeah, I was a little bit nervous about it. I mean, my dad does not like kind of gambling and that kind of stuff. So like, I didn't even tell him I had won around that. My brothers and sisters did though. His first reaction was like, "You're not going to become a professional gambler, are you, Dad? Son?" And I'm like, "No, Dad. I'm good. Don't worry about it, Dad. This is going to kids' education and going to build the business and that kind of stuff." And that frustrated a little bit of some of the poker community too, because it's like the money never went back into the community.
Right. Oh, I was going to ask you that. I was going to say, because you had mentioned what you did with it. And I mean, this is obviously public knowledge. And so folks are kind of like, well, hey, wait a minute. I mean, is that a rarity or is that?
I don't know how rare it is now, but I think most people who win a tournament like that make the kind of money that you make on there. It was over $600,000. Like you said, it's public information. I mean, look it up. Most people spend that and just keep playing, and they play bigger and they play more events and they do stuff like that because it just becomes, hey, I can make a career out of this now, because you got a lot of money to back you up. And that was the farthest thing from my mind. I'm like, no way. I mean, I couldn't do what some of those people in that local casino are doing, like pay my mortgage, pay my bills by playing this. I mean, that's like that's stress that I just don't really want in my life. I love this as a hobby, and I love it in the competitive spirit of trying to win. And so it's just a hobby. It's been a very profitable hobby, around that. And I just enjoy the heck out of it. And it's really interesting story. Even to this day, I'll go play local tournaments. And I usually have done pretty well. Like last year or in 2019, I won a tournament. I made like 50 grand or something from that tournament. And I used that money to still go play in the WSOP. So every year I lead up before it and I go play and I make some money from that. And then I use that money to go. And so I literally never touch, my own personal money really when it comes down to it. I play this game. And so it's been a very fruitful hobby around that. I'm also a little bit of a poker, tournament snob, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't play tournaments unless they're worth enough money to play. Look at it this way, Chris. I'm only going to get lucky so many times, and I might just play all the ones that you make good money playing them because it's like, heck, I just run well in those moments around that. So I don't play like the local $200 buy-in that you can win like $4,000. I'm like, I ain't doing
I don't have time. My time is way too valuable for that.
Yeah. I mean, that probably comes off the wrong way, but it's just kind of the truth of the matter. I mean, that's kind of who I am. It's like, hey, I kind of like the glory of it all. Like that's why I still have in my mind that, I do want to win another bracelet again, just because it's just like, it takes off the stigma of, hey, anybody could get lucky once around that, but you win it twice. And it's like, all right, you're really good. It just kind of like, there's that piece that I know, like when I get around professional players, they all just think I'm a luck box, right? Because it's like, hey, he's not that good around that. Yeah, because they do it for a living. And Chris, the reality is they are better. But I'm telling you right now, playing a no limit hold'em tournament, I can compete with them. I can compete with them there. But playing poker, they crush me.
Right.
They crush me. They take all my money if I played a cash game with them. It's a matter of time.
God, that's so interesting. That is so interesting.
It's an interesting community. It's a really, really interesting community. I've never really been fully accepted in that community. Really? Even though I know a lot of players and that kind of stuff within that, and I've played with a lot of players around that. Yeah, it's because it's just I don't know how to explain it. It's just their own community around that. The fact that I played in this tournament, I won a bunch of money, and I wasn't backed, because backing, for those people that don't understand, that people don't use their own money to necessarily get in and play these tournaments. Somebody's backing them, and they have all kinds of different arrangements. The typical arrangement is the backer gets 50% of the winnings, and the winner gets 50% of the winnings, but the winner never put any money up to go do that. And so I was never backed or anything like that. And so there's a little bit of a stigma the wrong way, which is interestingly about that. Would you think it'd be the opposite way? It's like, hey, congrats, you're using your own money to go win around that. But again, it's because my money doesn't go back into the community. And I think that's it, right? People, right? It's like, hey, he wins and then it goes away, and he wins and that money goes away. It never really comes back into the game. Because I've been invited to some of those home games and some of the larger games. I didn't play in them because I'm like, why? I mean, this money is way better off spent for me to invest in my children and into my business at the time. And now I would invest it into stocks and some other things. Sure. Around that. I just, it's not the money, but I don't play for the money, to be honest. I'm not playing it for the money. It's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to just say, oh no, you can have it for free. But yeah, I play for the glory of kind of the win, right? Around that. And that's just kind of like, for me, I think about, my legacy in life someday down there. No matter what, nobody can take away that I'm a Notre Dame grad, that, I walked onto a football team, that I won a World Series of Poker bracelet. That's always going to be something that is, those are things that not everybody's going to have an opportunity to ever say in their life. Right. And those are moments that I look back, and my kids will look back on that. My kids get so much immense joy about the World Series of Poker bracelet, way more than Notre Dame, by the way. They get so much joy about that. Because all their friends, like, they go to college. My son, he's at the University of Colorado, and every time I go to visit him, like, he's in a fraternity, and they're all like, oh, we got to play poker. We got to play poker against your dad. A funny story about that is I was there 2 years ago, 2019, and they really, really wanted to play with me around that. I said, okay, guys, we'll play. So, I don't know, it was probably like a $10 buy-in.
Right.
Had about 40 people that were bought into to this thing, and it was a winner take all. Right. So we're playing, and lo and behold, I end up winning the tournament. Right. Right. And so it was really unfair, though, Chris. So you play against a bunch of guys that don't know how to play poker. I mean, it was really, really unfair that I was playing against them. So I ended up winning around that. And the funny moment is I win. They give me the money. They Venmo it because everything's kind of online these days with those kids. And they Venmo me the money. And I wake up the next day and I go to my son. And I'm like, I can't accept this money. This is a bunch of college kids. I can't. And so I'm like, all right, you guys can't buy beer or any of that stuff, because they always do something for charity or philanthropy or something like that, right? So I said, all right, what's your next event that you guys are going to go do? I'm like, let's take this money and let's give it towards that. So you guys go and do whatever, kind of charity or give back type of event that you guys are going to go do, and kind of go and do that. But it was a funny moment because I was thinking about when I woke up in the morning, I'm competitive, right? So I won. So I'm like, yeah, send me the money. I won, right? And then when I woke up in the morning, I'm like, what am I doing?
I just ripped off some college kids. Oh my God, that is hilarious, man.
Yeah. So, but that's, you get a little sense of my character when it comes to that. Like, yeah, just like you put me into a tournament, and like, I've done this where every Thanksgiving, our family gets together, and especially on my mom's side of the family, we play a home Thanksgiving game. Like, literally, that's a thing that we've been doing for 15, 20 years, well before I ever won the World Series of Poker bracelet.
Really?
And so that's every Thanksgiving. That's kind of our thing, after turkey and all that kind of stuff. The adults who are 21 and older get around and and play a game. And it's usually like $100 buy-in or whatever.
Right.
And around that, and there's usually 15 or so of us that get together in that, and I'm super competitive in that, Chris. I mean, I'll take my mom out, my mom,
that's hilarious. So has your mom ever beat you?
No, she hasn't in any of these tournaments. I usually come like first, second, or third in those things. There's a certain luck that runs into that, but it's a little bit unfair. They've gotten a lot better over the years. My family has definitely got a lot better about it. But yeah, I'm just even competitive in that. My sister makes fun of me. She's like, you take the old lady's last check. I go, she shouldn't sit down at the table if that's the case.
Wow.
Now in a cash game, I'm different. But in a tournament, I don't know what it is. It's that tournament because there's a finite thing. It's a win or a loss, right? Is the kind of way I look at it around that. So yeah, I love poker though. Even to this day, if people ask me what's my hobby, it's like I love playing poker. It's an awesome hobby. It's you meet some amazing people. That's one of the things that probably people don't understand about poker. You can have every type of person at your table. You can have the college grad. You can have a business owner. You can have a guy who's, a felon out of prison. You can have, the drug dealer. You can have every type of person sitting on your table around that. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the social atmosphere of just meeting different people from all over the place and all over the different social classes, economic classes,
Sure.
Races, religions, all of that kind of stuff. So for me, it's just like, it's a potluck of people that you play against that can be from, any type of walk of life, any educational level around that. And that's, to me, that's fascinating. It's a game that, again, it's a game that you could play at the most competitive level, like the World Series, and play against just a whole different group of people, inside of that. So those are one of the things I enjoy about this. So the social aspect, like you said about it, I enjoy that. Like, hopefully someday you and I can just play a home game and we'll play a cash game. So it'll be fun. Cause you play a tournament, all of a sudden that monster in me comes out. Like I keep it rolling around that. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'd ask you, Chris, what are the moments in your life that kind of helped you become who you are? Because I've read a lot about your past and your history, and you grew up in a tough situation, single family home with your mom. I didn't realize you lost your mom when you did, which is kind of an amazing thing. I mean, to after that game and that kind of stuff. But what got you to where you're at? What were the moments that helped you be successful?
Well, it's really interesting, and I'm really big on leadership and kind of looking at kind of what makes the great, or, what is true leadership, right? And I think about what my mom did to allow us to survive, okay? And when I think about kind of what Holtz taught us, what Holtz talked us about leadership, about courage, character, things like that, and I find that I kind of learned those things indirectly from her. Right. And so my friend, and it's interesting because, they talk about with Coach Holtz, and if you had a chance to play for him, you've learned all these kind of life lessons and things like that. And yes, I have. But when I start to kind of look at what leadership is and really kind of take that deep dive into it, I think about its sacrifice, it's leading by example. It's putting others first. And, these qualities I had a chance to learn from her, but like I look at when I was elected a captain in high school, I didn't tell people what to do. I wasn't that loud enough guy. I just worked hard, and people saw that, and they saw me staying after practice doing a certain drill while everybody was leaving. And it's so funny. I forgot who I was talking to, but I was thinking about when we would practice at Notre Dame, and I was fortunate enough to be elected captain there as well. And I remember the first day that we had to do sprints, I ran with the linebackers, and I was a defensive lineman. We had already won a national championship. And I remember, I forgot who the coach was. He was like, "Hey, Zorich, you aren't a linebacker anymore." And he kind of laughed at that, but I kept doing it. And then all of a sudden, next week, another defensive lineman did it. And then after that, another one did it. And then all of a sudden, then you had a linebacker. He was running with the receivers. And so then it became this thing where, like, don't run with your position. Run with somebody that's, faster than you are. Run with somebody that's, you're trying to beat them. And I wasn't trying to be a dick. I mean, I wasn't trying to go, hey, I'm faster than the linebackers. I just knew that, hey, I was faster than all our defensive linemen, and I want to push myself. So I want to run with the linebackers. So I don't know where that came from, but, as I get older, I look at that. So to kind of answer your question, I mean, it was just kind of a combination, of those things, and realizing, like, hey, this was a necessity for me. I mean, I was going to college to graduate and get a job. This football thing, I didn't think I was going to go to the NFL. I didn't think I was going to get a college scholarship. Matter of fact, when Notre Dame offered me, I thought that they didn't watch all my film because I didn't think I was that great of a player. Like, I didn't make every tackle. So therefore, hey, I'm not that great. But it's that intensity that I wanted to be on every tackle that allowed me to kind of be in this situation. So it's so funny because when I think about those leadership qualities, I just think about my mom and kind of what she showed me without telling me. I mean, she didn't sit me down and say, hey, this is a leader like Holtz would do with us, or, this is how you become successful. She didn't say that. I was just able to kind of watch her and kind of see what she was able to accomplish. And then I was able to kind of learn from her. So thank you for asking me a question on my podcast. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, you as a kid, you were a hero of mine. Seeing you play at Notre Dame and just seeing the way what you just described is almost how I saw you on the field. And like I said, I'm a guy that just loves football. And as you probably noticed, I just know all kinds of stuff about it. And so I can remember seeing the number 50 jersey and just seeing this guy was relentless. I mean, he was just relentless on the field. He was going to come, he's going to go sideline to sideline. He would chase you down. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And so I was curious what, was it sounds like you were very humble actually, and you just worked hard and you were going to outwork people around that. And I remember one of the sayings that Lou Holtz said, there's no such thing as luck, it's preparation meets opportunity. And that's how I feel about poker, right? I prepared and I got that opportunity and I took advantage of it. And so we can call, I got lucky, but honestly, I was very well prepared for all the different moments that happened. And then I believe that, and I try to teach my kids that, it's, preparation because I try to teach, I got this from Kevin Durant, interesting enough, but the saying of hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard around it. And that's another thing I try to teach my kids. It's like, your talent level can be here, but you can outwork people. And if you have the talent level and you work hard, right, best of luck to the next person, right? Because you're really gonna succeed. And then, Russell Wilson, he has the saying of, separations in the preparation, preparations in the separation. That those are things that when I hear that, that's how I kind of live my life, around that. It's, really work hard and prepare yourself for the things that you really want to achieve in life. And I'm a big believer in manifestation of thought. If you manifest the things that you think about and you really contemplate on them, then you can understand what you want to go do and just start working towards it. And I use the Nike saying, just do it. I have a lot of people in my life that are super, super talented, but they won't take that first step. They're not willing to fail to succeed.
Mm-hmm. And it's tough. It's tough, though.
It is tough, but I've been fortunate enough in my life that, like you said, I don't know where it came from. I don't know where that came from,
right,
but I'm totally willing to be out there, to kind of take the next steps and to hear that from yourself around you not knowing where that came from. It actually almost felt good for me because I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, was I supposed to know where that stuff came from?
Right.
I don't, and that's maybe, God's gift to all of us around some of that stuff that you kind of just take. I was listening to Joe's podcast and with you and him, we're actually your podcast with Joe as the guest around that. And it was neat to hear him wanting to play basketball. That was just a really cool moment.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow. And he had the chance to actually do it. And I was like, oh, wow. I would have never known Joe Montana could dunk a ball when he was in high school.
Right.
And he was, because you don't see Joe. Obviously he's a great athlete. You just don't play in the NFL if you're not. But you don't see Joe. I didn't think Joe Montana. If I had to compare, I was like, no, John Elway was the way better athlete than Joe Montana. But that probably might not have been true.
Right. Or the fact that he was kind of what you're talking about, but not only was he asked to walk out in Notre Dame by the head coach, but also having a chance to get a scholarship at NC State the year after they won the national championship. So it wasn't like, hey, let's get this, let's field this team with some scrubs. I mean, here's this kid, Joe Montana from Pittsburgh. Let's find this guy to see if he could, he could play for our team. I mean, that was amazing. But I thought it was so interesting for him because the one thing I wanted to know was, how are you cool when there's chaos around you? And he talked about how he was like, man, I got the chills talking about, man, it was my dad. My dad would make me uncomfortable. I'd go up for a layup and he'd knock him. Dude, what are you doing? Hey, you aren't going to get that shot in the game. I mean, and it wasn't just basketball. It was everything he did. And the idea that he was able to equate that to what? I mean, the chicken soup game, the catch. I mean, these are all monumental situations that he was part of, that he was able to learn from his dad, in the yard doing hoops. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. It's funny you say that because I think I got some of that from my older brother. My oldest brother always made things difficult on me. Always made things difficult on me, and always trying to challenge me in those moments around that. But yeah, Joe Cool. I think that's as a fan watching him, that it was always amazing to me. I'm like, I don't know how this guy in the biggest moment is, sitting there going, yeah, there's John Candy, over there in the Super Bowl.
Right.
What? This guy's right like that. And he's an idol, of course, to kind of see him, Notre Dame grad, but just also what he did in football, but just also just kind of who he is, right? As a guy. I mean, he's just this cool guy. Listening to your podcast and listening to him on it, I was just like, wow, this is, he's just like a regular guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which I thought was great, because a lot of times, and I told him beforehand that, this isn't about kind of how many Super Bowls you won, even though you won 4. I mean, that's just a whole different conversation. But the idea of kind of, I want to know who Joe is beyond kind of the rings, right? And although I've met him a couple times, having the chance to really spend some time with him, I think was great. Just like I'm able to kind of spend some time with you. Last question, kind of through all these experiences that you've had, can you talk to me a little bit about what leadership kind of means to you? Because I really love that concept. I was kind of curious on what you were able to kind of learn over the years.
Yeah, so leadership for me means getting more out of people than they think is possible that for themselves. So to me, leadership is really figuring out the different things that you can do to really show somebody that maybe they didn't even think they could achieve it, and they achieve more than that, right? And that to me is true leadership, when you can get more out of people than they think is possible from themselves. And so I've been really fortunate in my business career to really focus in on that and use different leadership styles to really help people achieve more than they even think is possible. And that to me is what real leadership about, is that ability to get something out of somebody. I mean, I think when I look back, I had coaches. Lou Holtz was one of them. Lou had a way to get more out of you than you thought was humanly possible around that. And that's really is leadership, right? Right. To me, at least for me. And you said, show by example and those kind of things. I think there's just a lot of different tool belts that you wear in terms of leadership. Some of it's show by example, but when you're a coach, it's hard to show by example other than showing up on time, working late, those kind of things. But you really got to figure out the person, right? So there's a lot of different leadership styles that I've developed, especially in my professional career, to help me really get more from people than I think they can see possible. And then when you can get people to work together in something, and that's where the team sport aspects come in. So it's not just about the individual, but it's when a team can kind of come together and achieve something, whether it's putting out new technology, out there, whether it's business results and selling more around that. Those are things that I really enjoy myself around that. I've probably read 10 times the amount of leadership books than I have poker books. And I've read a lot of poker books around that, because I enjoy leadership and trying to get more out of it. I feel like at Notre Dame, they taught us, especially in the business school, I felt like I was taught that you don't go out and get a job, you go out and create a job. That's what I felt I learned at, my finance and economics degree from Notre Dame. And that's always kind of stuck with me, is that, I'm not here to get a job. I'm here to create jobs right, for people. And that's kind of where, my career has been. And so I think it's a great question to ask, because leadership's probably another passion of mine, quite frankly, Chris. Like,
that's awesome.
We could talk probably another 2 hours on just leadership. I know it's getting late for you and for me as well.
Sam, this has been awesome, man. This has been great. And selfishly, I mean, I think we spent a little bit more time on the poker thing. I apologize about that, but I was kind of fascinated. I was kind of learning from your knowledge. So that's absolutely awesome. I'd like to thank everybody watching and listening to this episode of the Zorich Podcast. Thank you to my director and producer, my wonderful wife, Candy, because without her, I would not be able to do this because I'm not that technology sound. This podcast, along with our others, are on my YouTube page at youtube.com/ChrisZorich50, as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out the description below, as we have a list of books from Amazon by folks who have been on the podcast, like Joe Montana, Lou Holtz, and Jerome Bettis. Sam, this has been great, dude. This has been absolutely terrific, man. I hope you have a chance to come back. And more importantly, I hope we have a chance to hook up when we go to the game. Will you be going to any of the games this year?
Oh, for sure. I got this pent-up demand to go to a football game.
Awesome,
question, I'll DM you or I'll text message you, and we'll find a way to go to a game together for sure, because I think it would just be a lot of fun to go to a game, just in general. But to go to a game with you would be just a joy. So I would definitely get the opportunity to do that. I'll let you know when I plan to go there. I usually go to a game a year. Obviously, I didn't get a chance this last year to do that. So I'll let you know what games I'm looking for. You can let me know as well. We'll find a way to hook up.
Sounds good. Sam, thank you much, man. Last thing, go Irish.
Go Irish.